On April 24th, 1715, the starting gun was fired for a devastating battle at sea. 17 ships in service of king and country. The arch-rivals Denmark and Sweden have a long-standing dispute. Their feud over trading routes and coastlines belongs to the bloodiest chapters in the history of Scandinavia. Divers keep finding old cannons at the bottom of Kiel Bay. However, it was a mysterious wooden construction that made scientists spring into action. The state of Schleswig-Holstein commissioned an investigation. In 2009, German and Swedish archaeologists investigate the area. The discovered objects seem to be linked to a long-lost big sailing ship. The experts are sensing a scientific sensation. Along the placid harbor in Schleswig-Holstein, scientists of the Archaeological State Office make their final preparations for the mission Wreck of the Baltic Sea. The scientists were told about a promising discovery. Martin Segschneider has been searching for a ship that sank close to the coastal waters for a very long time now. This platform in Kiel Bay will serve as an outpost for 2 weeks. From there, the team will investigate the vast area and try to identify the wreckage.
Our written sources state that there has to be a wreck down there, and now it really seems to be there. We now have a chance to connect the ship to a specific name and bring a piece of history back to life. Then, things will get really exciting.
They are in search for the big sailing ship Hedvig Sophia, the former flagship of the Royal Swedish Navy and pride of the nation. Rear Admiral Hans Wachtmeister has the commando on board. In the spring of 1715, his orders were to permanently disturb the Danish's trading routes. The heavily armed Hedvig Sophia sails towards the western Baltic Sea. There has been a long festering conflict for the predominance of the inland sea in those days because the Danish kingdom controls the 3 only access points to the 7 seas. Frequent battles take place, especially around Øresund. When the Danish Navy hears about the Swedish attack, they're forced to act fast. The commanders immediately put together a fleet of 11 sailing boats that should follow the enemy's tracks.
We'll have to navigate through this part here.
Do you think that's wise, Captain?
The latest news of pillage comes from Fehmarn. The Hedvig Sophia was spotted in the island's coastal waters together with 5 other warships. Not far from Fehmarn, the wreck divers are getting ready for their first operation. The water temperature is at 0 degrees centigrade. The divers attach a second regulator in case of the valves freezing. The archaeologists know the coordinates of the site, but battling with the low visibility, it's still difficult to find. First, the divers encounter a heavily encrusted hill. Countless ballast rocks lie underneath the thick vegetation. In a direct line, the typical wooden planks of an old sailing ship become visible. The scientists have hit jackpot. On the bottom of the Baltic Sea lies a historic wreck. Position and size have to be documented at the site. Only then can experts begin the excavation, hoping to discover the ship's name.
It must have been a truly powerful vessel. The pile of stones that we saw, I guess those are ballast rocks, is enormous. It must be over 20 meters long, probably 25 meters actually, and rises approximately 1.5 meters from the sediment. Well, that's gigantic.
Rolf Lorenz was searching for the wreck for almost 40 years, but his investigation in Kiel Bay was unsuccessful.
Morning.
Hi, Barton. Well, this place is great, man.
Lorenz was one of the first to provide valuable clues about the ship. Already in the 1970s, he discovered a load of antiquated ammunition. The musket bullets also part of his collection. For the commercial diver, the localization of the remains is the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. Finally, his findings can be linked to his ship. Rolf Lorenz guards the film material of his early dives in Kiel Bay as if it were a precious treasure. One of the highlights is the video of a peculiar recovery equipment, homemade style. When Lorenz discovered upon some of the cannons, he wanted to bring at least one of them to the shore. To lift the cannon to the surface, he needed a suitable lifting device. He took empty oil barrels and filled them with compressed air. These barrels and cannons were connected with a rope. The buoyancy lifted the construction slowly and safely to the surface. For a long time, the cannon has been stored in the Archaeological State Office. Meanwhile, experts know that it dates back to the 18th century, but only now the historical connections become more evident. In April 1715, the Danish officer Peter Vessel also receives the order to chase after the Swedish fleet. The ambitious man launched a picture book career. In only a few years, he rose from a deckhand to a captain of a frigate. In the battle over the waterways, Vessel was assigned a special mission. His order is to locate the enemy and to inform the Admiralty immediately. When Vessel set sail from Copenhagen, the Danish fleet has already been on their way for 6 days. But with his fast sailing ship, he manages to catch up. He sails past his own people with wind from a beam, heading southwest, heading towards Femern. The officer expects things to go easy. The area around the island is secured by the Danish. There is no escape for the Swedish.
Ship in sight!
On April 22nd, the spotter vessel discovers the Swedish enemy. The Hedvig Sophia and its fleet are anchored in the waters like sitting ducks. Vessel turns around immediately. Already in the afternoon, he encounters the Danish line and informs his superiors about the number and position of the Swedish ships. The pursuit can begin. A wood analyst shall determine which ship lies on the bottom of the sea. A loose piece from the ribs is sufficient for the investigation. Apart from the remains of the hull, the archaeologists didn't find anything that would indicate the origin or name of the wreck. The piece of wood that the divers bring up is the first tangible clue. Martin Segschneider inspects the weathered log immediately.
This is where the plank sat.
Just from the small cutout, the material can be easily determined. The shipbuilder used solid oak wood. But with concern, the experts note that the shipworm has left his usual traces.
I'll just put it back like this.
Yes.
Only analysis will show if the wood can be used for age determination. Dr. Karl Uwe Heisner puts it to the test. First, he prepares the rib for the so-called dendrochronological analysis. He cuts out a piece of oak wood which shows the annual rings. They provide much information about the age of the tree. The grains are also an accurate climate protocol. The wider the distance between the rings, the better the conditions for growth were during that time. With a microscope, Heusner measures the width of the rings.
There is a crosshair in the microscope, and with the crosshair, you can select each annual ring individually. Every time I use the mouse, the measuring sense delivers the measured value to the computer. The beeping confirms that the data has been saved to the computer.
On the computer, the data is transformed into a graphical pattern. Heusner then chooses reference curves from the archives. This data is also derived from oak trees and shows the corresponding annual rings. This means that the trees grew in similar climate conditions. The tree was felled in 1683. There is no doubt about that. It comes from Denmark or South Sweden. This doesn't explain yet which ship lies on the bottom of the sea, though. Rear Admiral Wachtmeister found himself in a precarious situation. The enemy had spotted him. On April 24th, 1715, the opposing units are getting ready for combat. The big warships are at the front line. The lighter vessels try to operate from the second row. In a combat at sea, the right tactical maneuvers often decide victory or defeat, because the floating giants are difficult to maneuver. The Hedvig Sophia is no exception. The ship is constructed to endure hostile cannon fire as long as possible. Hans Wachtmeister puts all of his eggs in one basket. He orders to position the cannons. The Hedvig Sophia has over 80 heavy guns.
Let's go, everyone, to your stations.
Everyone on board knows their role. But in the face of the powerful opponent, the crew is expecting the worst. It is particularly hard for the men operating the guns. The Swedish are fighting for their lives. They know that they only have 6 ships, while the Danish have 11. The attackers are focusing on the Hedvig Sophia and open continuous fire. The sailing ship has been already hit on the first broadside 5 times below the waterline, a devastating belt that leads to a decision. The Danish fire with everything they have. With 498 cannons, they are militarily vastly superior to their enemy, who only commands 323 cannons. Both sides suffer significant losses. The Danish are hit badly. The battle over the Baltic Sea takes its toll. Wachtmeister desperately tries to break through the battle lines. His hope is to escape safely to the homeland, but his tactics and maneuvers don't work. Water is already leaking into the Hedvig Sophia. The flagship threatens to sink. The Vasa depicts the dimensions of a warship from the 17th century. But the showpiece of the Swedish Navy was never put into service. The ship sunk on its maiden voyage in the harbor basin of Stockholm. The royal family paid the impressive sum of 100,000 Reichsdaler for the construction. The double-decker had 64 cannons on board. around 1,000 oak tree logs were used for the hull alone, not even counting the wood for over 700 carved figures and other installations. A warship wasn't just a weapon, but most of all, a costly investment.
A ship that was already armed and provisioned was an immediately useful tool for your enemy. And so if you started with 2 fleets of equal size, say 10 ships, and one fleet captures one from the other, now that ship has a 2-ship advantage. So that it's now 11 to 9. And so it's an extremely valuable commodity because of the time it takes to build a ship. It took 2 or 3 years to build and outfit a ship. It only took 1 day to capture one.
Scientists in Kiel Bay are still trying to put the pieces together. It's not clear why the wreck lies in shallow waters. They also wonder why there are no indications of combat at the site. However, the divers find guns and cannonballs only 100 meters away and in direct line to the open sea. It appears that the ammunition points the way to the ship. The result of this inventory is surprising.
Underwater, the wreck seems very inconspicuous. We uncovered it now, but you couldn't really see anything. This was different with the cannonballs on the field. They were visible at the surface. Even though they were pretty overgrown, it was evident that there were several objects scattered around. Together with the cannons, it was basically one line, and this line ends right here at the wreck.
The next morning, the archaeologists head back to the ammunition field once more. At a depth of about 6 meters, Lorenz has found another projectile. Lorenz believes the object to be an ammunition bundle, the like of which is only rarely found. Considering the size, number, and the arrangement of the bullet, it could actually be a Traubhagel bullet. The weaponry from the 17th century got its name from its characteristic looks. The structure resembles a grape, Traub in German. The projectile is still completely intact. Just like the other ammunition, it appears it was never used. The chart proves, at least, before the ship ran aground, the cannonballs and projectiles weren't on board anymore. The scientists recover the rare piece cautiously. It will be brought to the laboratory in Schleswig for further analyzing. The excavation of the wreck of the Baltic Sea also lures the archaeologist Fred Hawker to Kiel Bay. The colleague from the Vasa Museum wants to inspect the Traubhagel.
Hi, Martin.
Hi, Fred. Nice to meet you. That's the bow and that's the stern.
Hawker has been studying the weapon systems of old warships for a long time now. He knows about the devastating impact a bundle of ammunition can leave behind.
Instead of going out of the board just as one object, it goes like this, like a shotgun blast, and spreads over a bigger area. Something like this would injure people across a front maybe 2 meters or 3 meters wide. But ideally, this is getting pretty brutal now, you didn't want to kill members of the opposite crew. You wanted to wound them instead. That's true of virtually all military action. A dead man is 1 man out of action. A wounded man is 3 or 4 men out of action. The wounded man plus the 2 or 3 men it takes to take care of him, to get him out of the way, while he's screaming and demoralizing everybody around him.
Inside the Traubhagel, 12 or more iron bullets are arranged around a wooden shaft like grapes. Everything is glued together with pitch, wrapped in linen, and tied up into a bundle. When firing a cannon, the black powder ignites and the grape explodes. The effect can be compared with a gigantic shot load. After the battle, the Hedvig Sophia can barely maneuver. On top of that, Heinz Wachtmeister counts more than 700 dead and injured bodies. Until the end, the Swedish were hoping for support from their homeland, but there is no help in sight. After the crushing defeat, the inexperienced warrior is faced with some difficult decisions. Under no circumstances can his fleet fall into the hands of the enemy. Below deck, the ship's doctor has his hands full providing at least a minimum of medical treatment. But if the patient can't be brought back to land in time, his skills make no difference. Most of the injured die of blood loss or gangrene. The insufficient medical equipment and poor hygiene cost many humans their lives. The Swedish find themselves in a devastating situation. Almost the entire fleet is no longer seaworthy. The ammunition is nearly used up. Trying to escape to the homeland would be doomed to failure. Another battle is also out of the question under these circumstances. And to make matters worse, even the weather isn't on their side. The wind blows from the east, but they cannot stay around Fehmarn since the island is enemy territory, and behind them lurks the Danish fleet. The rear admiral has no option but to let the winds take him west, towards Kiel Bay. It's risky, but their only chance to distract the enemy. Hans Wachtmeister is planning a feint. He wants to send the Vita Örn home. The new Swedish supership was just put into service recently and is hardly damaged. She might be able to escape. Peter Vessel is on alert. The Dane orders to watch their opponent's ship's movements carefully. But he doesn't anticipate their plan to bring the Vita Örn to safety. Impatiently, Vessel waits for instructions. He cannot take action without order from his superiors. Meanwhile, the Vita Örn leaves her own ranks and picks up speed. When Peter Vessel notices the sudden breakaway, he realizes what the Swedish are up to. Vessel is determined to capture the evasive frigate for the Danish crown. Finally, the highly anticipated order arrives. The young captain can now prove his abilities as a sailor. From the beginning, Vessel has had his eyes on the Vita Örn. With her 30 cannons, the fast-sailing boat is a juicy prey. Seizing her would bring fame and glory. The hunt is on. To reach north, the Vita Örn has to go against the wind. In her wake, the Dane begins his pursuit. For Hans Wachtmeister, this is the right moment for entering the second stage of his plan. The rear admiral immediately moves his fleet to Kiel Bay. The Danes stand back as their arch-enemy withdraws. They believe the Swedish fleet is thrusting into their trap. At the same time, Peter Vessel keeps up his pursuit of the Vita Örn. He keeps losing her sight. Sources state that he was undertaking some daring maneuvers, trying to catch up to the enemy. But the Vita Örn is moving north unquestionably. If she manages to escape through the little belt into the open sea, the small frigate could be safe. At the dawn of April 25th, 1715, the Danish captain is making a last attempt to catch up. The Swedish ships now lie at anchor in the waters before Kiel Bay. For them, there's no going back. Gottorp Castle in Schleswig. Many finds from the Great Northern War are stored in this historical building. Recently, the Traubhagel bullet from the Baltic Sea joined the collection. Since its arrival at the conservatory, the fragile ammunition bundle has been lying in an acid bath. This way, the incrustations can be cautiously removed. Already after the first procedure, the pristine condition of the wood linen and bullets becomes evident.
If you would just leave this object as it is, it would slowly disintegrate. The wood would shrink, warp, and twist. The iron bullets would fall apart, and the residues would be lying around somewhere. The linen would disappear completely in no time. It just wouldn't be what it is now.
The restoration work takes almost a year. During this time, the Traubhagel is being taken apart completely. Every iron bullet undergoes a cleaning process that is repeated over months.
How is it going with our Traubhagel? It's growing and developing, growing and developing. Beautiful.
Martin Segschneider inspects the valuable find personally.
Now you can really see
The cleaned ammunition bundle now confirms what Segschneider's suspicion from the very beginning was. The projectile has never been used. This makes it a valuable indication for what happened Kiel Bay.
Who would just throw away their ammunition voluntarily? It's like giving yourself up, because obviously at the moment I throw ammunition into the water, I can't use it anymore, of course. That means that they had reached a critical point where there was no turning back. It was just about surrendering as little as possible to the enemy.
The Swedish plan to avoid their fleet being captured by the Danes. Hans Wachtmeister wants to destroy the Hedvig Sophia together with the other 4 sailing ships. In front of the eyes of their tormentors, the rear admiral is staging a spectacle, the like of which has rarely been documented in the course of naval war history. Just a few miles away from the coast, the captain orders to measure their speed one last time. The water depth at this point is barely 10 meters. Then he orders to throw cannons and ammunition overboard, to cut the masts and riggings, and then to run all the ships aground. The more ballast they throw overboard, the faster the Hedvig Sophia becomes. Finally, the flagship hits ground with a slam. With the remaining cannons, the gunners fire deep holes into the ship's hull. Self-destruction, a desperate revolt against the victors. Rolf Lorenz and Fred Hocker are visiting the crime scene. They take the exact route that the Hedvig Sophia took 300 years ago. The sonar device on board shows the scientists the right way.
You think you're going to go aground, and so you want to lighten the ship. And by the more you throw off, the lower your draft is, so the closer into the land you can get. So, but you don't normally get a nice clear trail where you can see the path of the ship with stuff hoofed out of both sides in a nice continuous stream, and then you have the ship sitting there. It's a great picture of exactly what happened to get the ship into this position.
The situation at the site confirms what the sources tell us about the destiny of the Hedvig Sophia. Not only the distinct position of the field, but also the size of the hull indicates that it might be the Swedish sailing ship. Even the signature is missing, as the last archaeological prove. There is little doubt about the wreck's identity. Rolf Lorenz doesn't want to give up his search. His intuition already has helped the experienced wreck diver to achieve his goals before. For a few years now, his son Gerald has been assisting his expeditions in the Baltic Sea. He grew up with the hunt for old ships. Both men are a well-established team. They are sounding out wreck and ammunition field again, watching the seabed closely. And they are lucky again this time, although their find doesn't seem very spectacular. Father and son are retrieving finely grained pieces of metal from the sediment. They appear to belong to the handle of a sword. It's normally easy to assign old sidearms. There are plenty of comparison objects in the museum's collections. Rolf Lorenz doesn't know yet that his discovery marks a decisive step in this investigation. Martin Segschneider and two colleagues from Copenhagen are inspecting the objects. The scientists are looking for distinctive features. The hilt provides information. Guard, grip, and pommel look like they are from the early 18th century. Not only was Charles XII of Sweden wearing the same model, but it was also part of the official admiral's uniform. And Rear Admiral Hans Wachtmeister owns such melee weapon. The logbook reveals even more. The Swedish solemnly buried his sword in the Baltic Sea. After bringing me so much bad luck, you shouldn't be borne by me nor by anyone else. The inconspicuous find, probably Wachtmeister's personal legacy before his surrender.
Now, we have pieces of a sword that match that time perfectly. The ship sunk in 1715. The sword is dated around 1710. It couldn't be better, I would say. I guess we will never know for sure if it was really Wachtmeister's sword. But it seems reasonably likely, and it's astonishing, that we found these objects right by the wreck.
Many nautical miles from his own fleet, Peter Wessel doesn't anticipate what is going on in Kiel Bay. The Dane has been chasing the Vita Ön almost all night. He already thought he had lost her when he was finally able to cross her way and force her to turn around. On the morning of April 25th, the captain is heading southwest. Wessel now has to deliver his bounty safely to Danish territory. He wants to corner the sailing ship in front of Femern and hand it over to the Royal Navy. While the enemy escort breathes down her neck, the Vita Ön is looking for her fleet and guides Wessel towards the scene at Kiel Bay. He watches as the Vita Ön joins up, unimpeded. There is no trace of the Danish fleet. They still lie in front of Femern. The captain has to stand back and watch as his archenemy destroys one ship after another. Suddenly, he spots something happening on the Vita Ön as well. Cannons are being thrown overboard. Explosions rupture into the air. Just 1 hour later, the showpiece of the Swedish crown runs aground. Wessel sends a dispatch to his superior immediately. When Hans Wachtmeister notices the Dane, he has the white flag raised. A clever maneuver to save time until the very last ship is run aground. Because hoisting the white flag doesn't signal surrender, but merely shows a disposition to negotiate with the enemy. Peter Wessel takes this as an affront. He sees through these tactics. Without hesitating, he writes a letter to Hans Wachtmeister in behalf of his superior, Rear Admiral von Gabel. Wessel threatens not to give amnesty to anyone unless Wachtmeister puts a stop to his actions immediately. This unauthorized approach is risky, but Wessel wants fame and honor for himself and his homeland. Within minutes, a sloop delivers the message to the Hedvig Sophia. Wessel's threatening gesture has an impact. After reading that the enemy intends to kill all prisoners, Admiral Wachtmeister immediately ceases fire. Then he leaves the ship and surrenders. The game is over. Peter Vessel orders to bring the Swedish to the Danish flagship. By now, the fleet has pushed forward into Kiel Bay. The victor receives the prisoner of war respectfully, a privilege the senior officer is entitled to. The encounter between Carl von Gabel and his opponent Hans Wachtmeister is a meeting of equals.
Ja, mitt vapen har redan gått förlorat.
Von Gabel later writes in his logbook that the Swede came without weapons. That's why he hands him his own sword. Not without a hidden agenda, as it turns out. Von Gabel wants to come to a discreet agreement. In his report, Wachtmeister is supposed to show von Gabel's glorious deeds in a favorable light. Vessel's bravery is not to be mentioned officially. At least Vessel is allowed to make the Vita Örn seaworthy again. The Danish captain arrives with her in Copenhagen.
Wessel has von Gabel's battle report on board and is supposed to deliver it to the king. But he doesn't manage to because the king is at Gottorf, which nobody knew about at the time. And so Wessel seizes the opportunity to deliver the report in his absence and to include a small letter to the king, in which he points out how bravely he fought and how great a warrior he is.
My most powerful monarch, my most gracious supreme lord and king. Vessel writes to Frederick IV of Denmark. After the usual platitudes, he gets down to business, his great accomplishments in the battle over the Baltic Sea. He includes everything, especially how he managed to push the Vita Örn towards Kiel Bay. Thanks to his tactics alone, the frigate wasn't able to escape. And now he hopes to gather Swedish ships with the Vita Örn. Your most obedient and most humble servant, Peter Vessel. The news of the Danish fleet's victory over the Swedish archenemy spreads through the kingdom like wildfire. When the medals are bestowed, however, Peter Vessel leaves empty-handed. In the following months, he continues to write letters to His Majesty. His persistence finally pays off. Finally, in July 1715, the 25-year-old captain receives high command of the Vita Örn. Rear Admiral Hans Wachtmeister faces one last unpleasant duty. He must explain the loss of the Swedish fleet to his king, and that the national pride, the Vita Örn, now sails under Danish flag. As a prisoner of the Danish crown, Wachtmeister is not in control of his own destiny anymore. But the senior officer is facing mild prison conditions. Although he cannot leave Denmark, he is allowed to move around freely. Upon returning to his homeland years later, he re-enters the naval service without a loss of prestige. A new age is also dawning for Peter Vessel. He demonstrates his strategic vision and uncompromising commitment in other skirmishes at sea. Vessel goes down in history as Tordenskjold, Thunder Shield. Even today, every Danish child knows him by this name. The bloody battle at Fehmarn is just the beginning in the tug-of-war over the Baltic Sea. The Danish kingdom defends itself against the Swedish superpower again and again. A battle of superlatives with high losses on both sides. Their hard-fought victories secure the Danish crown's territorial claims in Northern Europe. Sweden, on the other hand, loses its key role. But the real winner is Russia. Denmark's former ally is pushing onto the big political stage. Within a short time, this big brother will dominate. The Danish attacker can restore 5 of the destroyed Swedish ships. Just a few weeks after the sea battle, they are sailing again under a red-white flag. But the Hedvig Sophia remains in Kiel Bay. Her mission is completed. Like a memorial, she raises out of the shallow coastal waters, defying wind and weather. But over the centuries, the giant begins to disintegrate. Slowly but surely, the Hedvig Sophia disappears. The underwater currents damage the hull severely, and on top of it, the shipworm is eating through the soft wood, leaving nothing but rotten planks and ballast stones. Forces of nature almost succeed in erasing the last traces of this sailing ship. The news of the discovery came barely in time.
It's like a puzzle, except you have to imagine, first you throw away the box, because you're not going to get to see a picture, and then throw away 3/4 of the pieces. And if you really want to make it like underwater archaeology, then throw in a bunch of other stuff that has nothing to do with the puzzle. You know, a large part of this has nothing to do with the ship.
The underwater archaeologists have a lot of work left to do until the investigation is complete. But the first step is done. The long sought-after wreckage of the Hedvig Sophia reveals an eventful chapter of the Great Northern War, the battle over the Baltic Sea. Recently, authorities put a preservation order on the Swedish flagship. The rotten remnants remain on the bottom of Kiel Bay. For their second campaign, the scientists are planning actions to secure the wreckage. 300 years after her spectacular demise, the Hedvig Sophia is making history once again.